So let's get on to the electricity sector. The African Development Bank and the World Bank has jointly produced a new set of indicators resulting in the development of the Global Electricity Regulatory Index produced by the World Bank. Today, the EFDB and the World Bank released the two reports, the Electricity Regulatory Index for Africa 2022 and the Global Electricity Regulatory Index 2022. Now, this year's edition of the ERI 2022 covers 44 of the 45 countries identified with independent regulatory authorities, while the first edition of the GRI 2022 covers 82 non-OECD countries from around the world, and half of them in sub-Saharan Africa. Let's take a listen to one of the virtual panel discussions today on this new reports and the reality of electricity regulation on the African continent.
There are regulators that are quite advanced, and regulators are lagging behind. And I take your point that, of course, it's important that knowledge is exchanged and best practices is better understood. So thank you very much for those initial remarks, James. Let me now turn to Enrique Gutierrez. Enrique, thank you for joining us. Significant progress can be made in meeting climate change and net zero commitments by increasing renewables in generation, as you know. However, we see that despite wind and solar power becoming commercially viable globally, these resources remain largely untapped in Africa. So what specific actions should African regulators take to support the expansion of, for example, renewable energy in particular?
Thank you so much first of all, for the invitation. And I think, just following the first, kind of echoing the first panel, I'm going to focus more on kind of the substance recommendations. At the IEA, I think and I think, kind of timely with yesterday, we had the release of the renewables report, where we kind of have an idea that, we expect in the next 5 years to have as many renewables as we did in the last 20 years. And, this can actually be accelerated by, I think, even up to 3,000 terawatts if we actually remove the barriers. And here, what one of the main barriers we have seen is that, and I think also, again, what Mr. Banda said just now, is that we need to kind of empower regulators to see themselves as kind of the accelerators for the renewables deployment. In many cases, and some of the networks that we run as well, you may be aware that at the IEA, we work mainly with ministries. We're starting to work more increasingly with regulators. And one of the main challenges we see here is, as mentioned earlier, if the policymakers do not give the opportunity to the regulators to implement the new mandates, it is quite difficult to fit, objectives of decarbonization, kind of the work plans and actually the tools that they have. So in terms of what can be done, I wouldn't say not only across Africa, but other regions that we work in, for example, in Southeast Asia or in Latin America or in the Indian subcontinent, is, I would say, maybe three key areas. So one of them is kind of looking at, and ensuring greater access and ensuring transparency. I think I heard it earlier in the first panel as well, that transparency is essential for developers and investors to actually know when and if a program can get online, if a program will be bankable, and what are the risks, for example, waiting for interconnection or covering the cost. I think one of the examples that we've been looking at, for example, is in Indonesia, where, it's also an economy with a growing population, with a growing need for electrification, and where actually there's a commitment to increase the investment in renewables. And here, because maybe the state utility could actually leverage some extra resources, having international investors and banks. One of the key barriers that we have there that has been there so far is that there has been a lack of transparency in terms of the interconnection mechanism, but also in terms of how it will cost and everything. So in the recent years, we've implemented, and last September in 2022, they implemented a new regulation to actually streamline these kind of licensing processes for new renewable projects, and also kind of streamlining the way that interconnection works and the access to the network works.
Let me now turn to you, Martin. So we've been hearing from our colleagues about the how to deliver on this energy transition in Africa, Africa having its initial particular conditions and needs of expansion, infrastructure expansion. So what can you tell us about the experience in Latin America when it comes to power sector regulation and in particular to supporting the clean energy transition?
Cool. Thank you very much. When we think about the energy transition, we are thinking about changing first the primary energy sources, including more renewables, but we also need to think in improving the transformation process, reducing losses, increasing the efficiency of the process. And finally, there's the demand side to the transition, which involves electrification, energy efficiency, and so on. So of all these different dimensions of the transition, I want to, given the limited time available, concentrate on one particular aspect, which is changing the primary energy source, or changing the energy matrix towards including more renewable, a challenge that James just mentioned is pending in Africa. And within that, specifically from the Latin American experience of using auctions as a mechanism to procure new renewable energy. Out of Latin America, more than 16 countries have successfully implemented auctions programs to buy, in some cases, just renewables. In other cases, the auctions are open to different energy technologies. But the process themselves are very interesting and very useful. So that's the thing I think I want to focus, this very particular aspect of the energy transition.
Rashid, let me turn to you and ask you a question about energy efficiency. How do you think African regulators are considering energy efficiency? And then let me turn to Calixte to see if we can explore a little bit about the investments that are required to meet Africa's growing demand for renewable energy, and just talk a little bit about how Africa is conceiving the issue of investment and financing. So, Rashid, over to you first.
Thank you very much. First of all, I would like to highlight the importance of the energy efficiency in the African perspective. First of all, I think energy efficiency in Africa, considering the low access of electricity, it is very important at least to use what we have wisely. That's number one. Number two, we expect by 2050, the electricity share in the energy supply will increase from 20% now to 50%. That means energy efficiency, it is important for Africa since we are building our system. And of course, considering the population's dimension, by 2050, Africa will be 2.5 billion instead of 1.4 now, and it will be more than 4.3 million by 2100. And I think this shows the importance of energy efficiency now and tomorrow. In terms of the role of regulators, I think regulator maybe they are aware about the importance of energy efficiency somehow, but really the complexity of the energy efficiency, it is maybe hindering them to play a good role. The first complex issue, the main stakeholder involved in energy efficiency, especially in end-using side, because energy efficiency, including building, transport, electric appliance, residential sector, industrial sector, utility itself. So there are a range of stakeholders that all need to be coordinated and regulated, which maybe it is difficult for regulator. And actually, to overcome this issue and to bring this energy efficiency on board, I think the awareness creation among all the relevant stakeholders, from decision maker, regulators, end user, utility, need to be enhanced, and also the capacity building. This also it is very important. And actually, also, I think the regulators maybe they lack incentive for industry, for trading, for household to incentivize them to move from the current pattern of consumption to the more efficient electrical appliance and lighting. And also, I think the regulators, they need some sort of enforcement of minimum energy performance standard labeling. And of course, this is not all this in the regulators' normal mandate, especially in other sectors like building, like trading, cross-border trading between the country. And this, I think, it is very good to be looked at.
African countries have made significant efforts to invest in clean energy. And we, as example, they installed renewable generation capacity grew from 35 gigawatt in 2017 to 54 gigawatt in 2021. So a 65% increase of total capacity. So, but there is still a need to scale up this effort if we want to achieve commitment related to Paris Agreement and pathway to net zero in the framework of just and energy transition. And to do more requires scaling up investment, which comes to your question, what Africa needs to do to attract more investment in renewable energy. So in interest of time, I will skip the part on investment needs and focus really on two key areas of gaps for consideration. One of the gaps is a regulatory gap, and the second one is the need to enhance the adequate medium to long-term integrated planning that includes the grid stability and energy security matters.